Table Talk by Idries Shah. Letters and the Charitable King. People are always asking why I correspond with them so seldom. Here are two answers to that. The first is that there was a king who asked a dervish why he did not come to see him more often. The dervish answered, "Because, 'Why have you not been here lately?' is sweeter to my ears than, 'Why have you come again?'" The second is that there was once a king who developed a charitable outlook and decided to distribute all his wealth equally among the people of the world. When all the necessitous ones had been counted, however, it was discovered that there was no coin small enough to give an equal amount to each, quite apart from the fact that the smallest coin had by itself no purchasing power. Merely to reproduce one's words and circulate them to all interested people may appear to be keeping in touch with them, but unless the occasion is suitable, it is only of social value, not of informative usefulness, let alone of knowledge value. If we are to admit that it is strictly social needs which are fulfilled by writings and meetings, then I will insist all the more upon a proper social relationship, not a false one, produced by modern methods of multiplying copies. Human development. Many people imagine that any higher human development, if it exists at all, must follow a pattern whose form, or at least whose beginning, is instantly perceptible to them as such. In making this assumption, these people expose themselves to control by any system which can take advantage of this expectation, and systems do take advantage of this. Many aspects of higher human development can only take the form of communicating knowledge and experience in a disguised manner. Rather, as we teach our children by involving them in activities which they consider to be amusements rather than lessons in, say, counting, or coordination, or manners. One method of accustoming people to a higher pattern is to involve them in activities and enterprises which are equivalences of higher things. Another procedure of great worth is also comparable to one employed in teaching children. It is to surround the pupil with data, which he absorbs piecemeal, until the penny drops. Broadcasting. You may know people quite well, see them every day, live in the same house with them. No special prominence attaches in their minds to what you say or do, until they know that you are to appear on television. Then they rush home early from the office, not to see you in the house, but to see you saying the same things on television. In the same way, people who would not dream of reading one of your books will huddle uncomfortably around a radio set to hear other people talking about it. It is a sad lack in the culture not to have made it possible for people to take an interest in something unless it is dramatized by the mere act of being broadcast, or ritualized. It is the same with people who say, "I must come to your lecture." You say, "You can hear me saying the same things every day without coming to a meeting." "But it is not the same," they say. Prison. Visualize a man who has to rescue people from a certain prison. It has been decided that there is only one promising way of carrying this out. The rescuer has to get into the prison area without attracting attention. He must remain there relatively free to operate for a certain period of time. The solution arrived at is that he shall enter it as a convict. He accordingly arranges for himself to be apprehended and sentenced. Like others who have fallen foul of this particular machine in this manner, he is consigned to the prison which is his goal. When he arrives, he knows that he has been divested of any possible device which would help in an escape. All he has is his plan, his wits, his skills, and his knowledge. For the rest, he has to make do with improvised equipment, acquired in the prison itself. The major problem is that the inmates are suffering from a prison psychosis. This makes them think that their prison is the whole world. It is also characterized by selective amnesia of their past. Consequently, they have hardly any memory of the existence, outline, and detail of the world outside. The history of our man's fellow prisoners is prison history. Their lives are prison lives. They think and act accordingly. Instead of hoarding bread, for instance, as escape provisions, they mould it into dominoes with which they play games. Some of these games they know to be diversions, others they consider to be real. Rats, which they could train as a means of communication with the outside, they treat instead as pets. The alcohol in the cleaning fluid available to them they drink to produce hallucinations which delight them. They would think it sadly wasted, a crime even, if anyone were to use it to drug the guards insensible, making escape possible. The problem is aggravated because our malefactors have forgotten the various meanings of some of the ordinary words which we have been using. If you ask them for definitions of such words as provisions, journey, escape, even pets, this is the kind of list which you would elicit from them. Provisions, prison food. Journey, walking from one cell block to another. Escape, avoiding punishment by warders. Pets, rats. The outside world would sound to their ears like a bizarre contradiction in terms. As this is the world, this place where we live, they would say, how can there be another one outside? The man who is working on the rescue plan can operate at first only by analogy. There are few prisoners who will even accept his analogies, for they seem like mad babblings. The babblings, when he says, "We need provisions for our journey of escape to the outside world," of course sound to them like the following admitted nonsense. We need provisions, food for use in prison, for our journey, for walking from one cell block to another, of escape, to avoid punishment by warders, to the outside world, to the prison outside. Some of the more serious-minded prisoners may say that they want to understand what he means, but they do not know outside world language anymore. When this man dies, some of them make of his words and acts a prison cult. They use it to comfort themselves, and to find arguments against the next liberator who manages to come among them. A minority, however, do, from time to time, escape. Testing. There is a Persian proverb, "To test that which has been tested is ignorance." To try to test something without the means of testing is even worse. I know that already. One of the commonest defenses against really learning something is to believe that one knows it already. If you say, "I know that," when someone who knows your interests and how to teach says something, you are indulging in this almost unconscious activity. Without comment. I was invited one day to the home of a distinguished psychiatrist. He received me in his study. There was another guest present. While we were in the study, this man talked very volubly. We went into another room to listen to some tape recordings. The other guest interrupted us frequently with his opinions. When dinner was served, the same man monopolized the conversation. After the meal, he talked and talked over coffee in the drawing room. Eventually he left, and I stayed behind to finish some discussions with our host. I said to him, "That man talked a great deal in the study." "Yes," said the psychiatrist. "That was because he did not know you and he was nervous." "But he talked a lot while we were playing the tapes." "Yes, that was because he felt that they were competition for him." "And he talked all through dinner." "Yes, that was because, with my wife present, he felt more at ease." "And then there was all that talk after dinner while we were having coffee." "Yes, that was because the drawing room was rather large for him, and he felt that he had to fill it with his voice to compensate." "I suppose that he would talk a great deal in a very small room, because he would feel hemmed in," I said. "Yes, that's a fair assumption," said the psychiatrist. Coercive agencies. Make it your business to study in your life and in your surroundings the growth, development, and activity of informal coercive agencies, not often recognized as such because of the poorly delineated identification and measurement tools in current use. Such tyrannies seldom have guns, clubs, centralized propaganda machines, uniforms, and recognizable officials. If you set up an experiment in any expectation, this expectation becomes a coercive agency whose attempts to lead you to certain conclusions you will have to take into account. Certain customs, social pressures, personal predilections, even individual decisions can become coercive agencies in your life. One of the reasons why man struggles against what he takes to be undesirable is that he unconsciously recognizes the coercive influences in the surroundings and in himself. He then chooses a measurable form of them to satisfy and therefore abolish his need to resist or frustrate them. He has, in so doing, of course, only begged the question. Thoughts, circumstances, the social milieu, 101 things can provide as powerful coercive agencies as anything that the human being can point to as a despotism or tyranny. If you are against tyranny, you must be against all tyranny in order to be consistent, not just an Aunt Sally tyranny. A set of misunderstood ideas or practices may become such a tyranny. A group of people who deal with each other with the greatest kindness, yet who perform practices or carry out other activities unsuitable for their development, are such an agency. The tyranny of ideas or practices is far subtler and more effective than the avowed repressive institution, because the participants are not aware that they are being constrained. The extreme case, the man who spends all his time shouting, "I'm free, I tell you," is not free, because of lack of time to do anything other than shout, "I'm free." Certain coercive agencies have become indispensable to the victims. People with closed minds or small ranges of thought and action depend for their pleasures upon the rewards offered by obedience to the coercive agency. If this obedience is couched in the form of disobedience, they feel that they are not coerced. Such people cannot make progress towards their mental liberation at one bound. Their world has to be made larger, and to be seen to be larger, before they can take any step beyond their narrow life. There is no repression like that of the man who causes his own in the name of freeing himself. Since he cannot attribute it to any outside source, and since he cannot see himself suppressing himself, he may very well be lost. He is already under the duress of slavery is freedom. It is interestingly indicative of his state that he fears loss of freedom while he has already lost it. He does this because, like a child, if he has lost something and merely pretends that he might lose it, this implies that he has still got it. We need not talk of social action, politics, nor economics, nor even sociology in this matter. The individual and groupings of people have to learn that they cannot reform society in reality, nor deal with others as reasonable people, unless the individual has learned to locate and allow for various patterns of coercive institutions, formal and also informal, which rule him. No matter what his reason says, he will always relapse into obedience to the coercive agency while its pattern is within him. This is one reason why you see people converted from one system of belief or practice to another. They are aware of the shortcomings of the first. They can pretend that the second, because it does not have the outer defects to which they take exception, is true, when the former was not true. The study of coercive agencies and man is what I would call this effort. Fortune. When fortune knocks, open the door, they say. But why should one make fortune knock by keeping the door shut? A few short miles. Have you ever noticed how much difference a few years or a few short miles can make to something? William Tell, the Swiss hero, so far as can be discovered, never existed. His tale, however, is found in Fariduddin Attar's Bird Parliament. The Central Asian Haji Bektash, only a few miles from Turkey, becomes in the Balkans Haji Pateshk. The ascension of Muhammad becomes the source for Dante. Have you ever wondered, when you have heard that the three kings of the Bible do not figure in the Bible at all, how some of the ideas which you cherish or are impressed by started their careers? At least in Japan, Do-Piaza is still applied to a typewriter, and smoking is in France a dinner jacket. But why should dervish become in English raving religious maniac? The value of this kind of literary exposition should be as much to show the warping of ideas as to correct the original definitions. If you are aware of the deforming process itself, you will be able to escape it, not just to rely on being fed the results of others' research. They may, you know, have missed things which could be important to you. If the dervish teacher Turabi is so effective that even his garbled names become a totem, Saint Therapion, what happened to his original effectiveness? Do you want the totem, or that which was of more than suggestive effect? Safe and sorry. Better to be safe than to be sorry is a remark of value only when these are actual alternatives. Idols. Have you noticed how economical the human race is with its idols? It sets them up, enjoys them, then falls upon them and devours them until there is nothing left. Even the complete consumption of the idol, if it is another human being, is not the end. There are then hundreds of years' worth of argument and analysis to be worked through. Promises. Never promise, even by implication, without fulfilling your promise. The only acceptable alternative to completing an undertaking is to over-fulfill it. To betray any promise, explicit or otherwise, will harm you more than it can harm anyone else. Systems of knowledge. No system is any use if you merely possess it. Ownership requires operation. No system is useful if one can only experiment with it. For a system to be useful, it must be correctly operated. The means of operating a system must correspond with contemporary needs. It should not be imitatively traditionalistic. Defectiveness of a system should not be confused with human shortcomings. People cannot attain certain things unless they have the means. A system may be complete for one set of circumstances, defective for another. Possession of a system or any part of it, or an interest in it or in discovering one, should not be assumed to confer any license or capacity to operate it. Individual criticisms of a system, incapacity to operate it, or dissatisfaction with it should not be confused with any shortcoming of the system. Consistency in a system, like inconsistency, is always more apparent than real, because what is coherent in one frame of reference may not be so in another. These points are intended to emphasize that information and familiarization with a system are much more important, vital, and urgent than to apply existing imaginings about it to any attempt to understand or operate it. Experience comes before understanding and before capacity to operate. Occasion. Every part of your development as a human being needs correct time, right place, suitable company. Without these, you will be as complete as anything else which lacks three desirable elements in due concert, like a plant, say, without water, sun, and earth. Bias. Rather the bias of the sympathetic human than the obstinate justice of the ass. Better still, the removal of bias. A bias towards goodness is still a bias. The ass of justice has a bias towards justice. The unbiased has no need of bias. He has knowledge. Principles and inelastic rules are the last bastion of the primitive. Principles are guides which substitute for knowledge. Rules are drawn up to guide those who do not know. Primitive man has stayed with us for eons, sustained by the pessimist belief that, since knowledge is impossible, substitutes must always be employed instead. A substitute is, however, to be used only when the real thing is not available. If too long deprived of the genuine article, man starts to demand only the substitute. That demand, however, does not convert the substitute into the real thing. Sufficient and sufficiently sustained adulation of the substitute will become the aim of the seeker. Ignoring the existence of the real thing, and even its possibility, is as effective in abolishing it as if it were not there for practical purposes. This is why men of knowledge must not only exist, they have to represent the very existence of knowledge, sometimes initially on a very low level. Beware of people who say, "We must have bias, even if it is bias towards good." The fact is that we must have bias towards knowledge, for it is only knowledge which will destroy bias. Fame and money. At the present time, fame, without diminution, can be turned into money. Money can also be turned into fame, but not on the same terms. A motto of the human race. Tell me what to do, but it must be what I want you to tell me. General Gordon. The story is told of a celebrated statue of General Gordon mounted upon a camel, which was one of the sights of Khartoum. This statue became a great favourite with a 3-year-old boy, and his nursemaid used to take him every day as part of his walk to see General Gordon. The day came when the family was leaving the Sudan, and the nurse took the little boy to say goodbye to General Gordon. He stood for a long time looking at the statue and said, "I shall not be seeing you again for a long time, so goodbye, General Gordon." Then he turned from the man on the camel to the young woman and said to her, "Nanny, who is that sitting on General Gordon's back?" This tale could very well be true. It illustrates, as well as would any other, the manner in which people assume things about knowledge without ever imagining that their view may be inconsistent with real circumstances. Sometimes it is almost by accident, as in this case, that one knows exactly what it is that the person has seen awry, although it may be evident that he is not clear about it. Like the camel of General Gordon, people often imagine that the means of transportation of a teaching is the teaching itself. For this reason they carry on revering the externals of individuals, or mere words, or exercises or theories. What counts is the effect, not the appearance, of a thing. Like our little boy, the student may see something which prompts him to ask a question which could clear everything up, and the information that he has been attached to something in the name of something else may be unwelcome. Dead and alive. It is a pity that there is a taboo which prevents us from investigating it, but the fact is, nevertheless, a lot of people who are clinically, intellectually, and emotionally alive actually died in every other sense years ago. People are afraid of taking this line of thought in case they turn out to be one of these, so they say that such a conception is ridiculous. They need not bother themselves, because if they are such as I have mentioned, they will never find it out. Judgment. Make sure, before you judge anything, that what seems to you to be untrue, most unlikely, unworthy of your consideration, is not in fact what you need. Everybody's truth is at some time someone else's untruth. Good and bad. Don't call anyone good or bad until you have covertly observed them. With a long enough run or a sufficiently permissive environment, you can see much of what he is really like. This knowledge, however, carries no license to oppose him. Thought. A great deal of thought is only a substitute for the thoughts which the individual would really find useful at the time. Words and information. Words are more often used to conceal information than to convey it. People who try the hardest to communicate, or think that they do, are generally preventing communication. Demonstration. Do you want to examine a socially conditioned individual who attributes what has been done to him as the work of a higher power? All you need to do is look at 9 out of 10 dedicated people. Good. Show me a man who thinks that he knows what good is, and I will probably be able to show you a horror of a person. Show me a person who really knows what good is, and I will show you that he almost never uses the word. Man. Kick him, he'll forgive you. Flatter him, he may or may not see through you. But ignore him, and he'll hate you, even if he conceals it until he dies. Politeness and truth. Politeness and telling the truth are, to your certain knowledge as well as mine, often opposites. Any society which enjoins its members to adhere to both of these is a fraud. All sorts of compromise formulae have been devised to gloss over or obscure this basic weakness. It remains nonetheless. This is not an exhortation to abandon politeness or telling the truth. It is a statement which has to be carefully thought about. The effort behind a teaching. Ordinary individuals reared on incomplete information have no conception of the amount of work which precedes the appearance and grafting operations of a great historical event. It is not surprising, therefore, though invariably inconvenient, that they expect immediate and miraculous happenings, successes, movements. They triumph in the end, of course, because it is they who write the history, the hagiography, the exegetics. Structure of a system. Observe an authority figure, an eternally valid literature, a hierarchy, commands and prohibitions. Do you know what you are seeing, apart from what its name may be? You are looking at the structure of a conditioning system. No higher usefulness is manifested at such a level. For a higher usefulness to be obtained, it may be sought apart from externals. Attachment to totems, slogans, and mandarins can only inhibit this process, however useful these appurtenances may be for other purposes. Illustration confused with belief. One of the tragedies of modern times is that people have come to believe that something said by someone in the past, perhaps for illustrative or provocation purposes, actually represents that person's beliefs at the time. Work. If you call different things by the same name, you start confusion. If you call work every kind of labour, you are doing this. If you are working below capacity, you are not working. If you are working at something you cannot do, you are not working. If you are working with enjoyment, without it, for necessity, and so on, you are able to only use the one word, work, and hence you are inefficient at describing what you are doing. Time. People complain about time being short, going fast. But when it seems to go slowly, they complain that it drags. Let us consider the people, not the supposed movements of time. Teaching. Please do not start to teach the blind until you have practiced living with closed eyes. Virtues. Ethic is socially conditioned. Human virtue is not the same as that of another sphere. Sometimes, however, the two run parallel. Restraint. The original purpose of cultivating restraint is so that eventually one will not need to have restraint. Knowledge. How curious that a man who closes his hand upon air so often thinks that he has a ruby within his grasp. Inner knowledge. You want to become wise in one lesson. First become a real human being. Meditation. Before you learn how to meditate, you must unlearn what you think meditation might be. Intellectuals. The self-styled intellectual sneers at the humble man's respect for some things. But if you want to see stupidity clearly and have a fireworks show into the bargain, speak against the thinker's sacred cows. You are then more likely to have a demonstration of what raving like a maniac means. Four Seekers. The chief of one band of seekers found a book. He and his followers studied it, forgetting that a means was not an end. In another case, the leader of a collection of dervishes found some wool. They spent years in working with wool. The guide of yet another circle discovered the virtues of plants and instructed his companions in plant lore. The successor of a certain teacher, having absorbed only woodworking knowledge, instructed his students in this. All worked with their materials. The book was memorized, and an attempt was made to apply its principles to everyday life. The wool was spun and made into yarn. The plants were cultivated and yielded dye. The wood was made into a variety of different artifacts. Then came a man of knowledge. He called together all the scattered groupings and said to them, "You have the materials. Now I will show you how, with your experience and my knowledge, a carpet may be made." But few could detach from wool, from wood, from plants, and from book upon book. Those few became the carpet makers. So it is with Sufi knowledge. Combining the parts makes the whole. But the people of wood want to work with wood. This would be well enough if there were a market for wood. What and from whom? Do you expect milk from a bee, honey from a chicken, or eggs from a cow? These ideas are absurd. Yet how many people stop to think before they ask for information and guidance from people who do not know that they are asking the impossible? The reason why they do not stop to think is essentially that they are not seeking information, knowledge, guidance. They are asking to be entertained, to pass the time, to be given attention. This is the reason why, as we have all experienced, people will ask for advice often enough, but do not take it, however good it may be. The purpose of the transaction is not to seek advice. And this is a reason why Sufis are often not popular, since it is not necessarily any part of their duty to carry on disguised therapies. They may not cooperate in the fiction, and people do not like that at all.